Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. We've got a very interesting show for you. Yep, Sankey is pulling no punches, and he's dropping bombs. This guy had went off the other day. I don't know how many of y'all saw that, but he came up and had many very quotable lines recently, not only about the SEC, but about Michigan, and also possibly South Carolina in a backhanded way as well. And we're going to go into that. And he appeared on ESPN. And I'd show it to you, but ESPN gets a little squirrely about their stuff. But what he said was very simple. He said, they asked him, he said, if Alabama were to beat Georgia, you could wind up with no SEC teams in the playoff. And he said, that's not the real world that we live in. And then he said it's a lot like Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. Basically, the SEC rules, and that's just the way it is. That was his first bomb that he dropped. Then he dropped another bomb that a lot of people didn't really catch. They thought it was more a smack at Michigan, which it was. But it could have been a smack in another direction as well. After he said the SEC is not like the other conferences, he said, and I quote, "We actually don't send signs to other people's events, but that's okay." And everybody laughed. Now let's dissect that for a minute. We actually don't send signs to other people's events. And if you want to watch that video, it's called Does Georgia Deserve to Be at the Top? It's on ESPN, and it was at the 6-minute and 47-second mark when he said, we don't send sign to other people's events. And again, I found that highly peculiar. And this is a guy that runs the SEC. He's going to know a lot, okay? Okay. Just like the Big Ten would know a lot. And if you know, Big Ten suspended Jim Harbaugh for 3 games over what they found out from the NCAA. Well, you know, if the Big Ten knows about it, the SEC knows about it. And we've talked a lot about the possibility that South Carolina might have received help from Michigan and Connor Stallions, because we know that Michigan scouted our team back when we were number 5 in the country with 1 loss last year with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and the guys. And we were hot. We were the number 1 offense in the country. And Michigan was worried about us because if they lose to Ohio State, they knew they'd be out and we would take their place. And of course, the word, an individual with direct knowledge, is that Michigan may very well have reached out to a team or two to help derail teams that could be in Michigan's path. Now, you're talking about Connor Stallions. This is a guy that wrote a 600-page manifesto about how Michigan is going to take over the world of college football. This is not a, level-headed dude, number one. And number two, he had 65 people working for him part-time as scouting mercenaries, if you will. He'd pay them to go scout the teams and record them with smartphones, is my understanding, and that's what's been reported. And then they would decipher the signs based on that information, both of which are rules violations. You can't send a forward scout in person to scout a team. And then secondly, you certainly can't use a recording device. So he broke both those rules many times for about 2.5 years until he got caught. And of course, people are calling this a conspiracy theory and all that. Well, there was a guy on Twitter that called this out about a buddy of his that had been asked to scout Tennessee when we played Vanderbilt, but we'd already lost to South Carolina, so it really wasn't that important. And he put it out on Twitter, and everybody called it conspiracy theory. Now he looks like a genius. So I just find it funny that Sankey brought that up the other day. And of course, you've seen the circumstantial evidence that I've laid out on this. With South Carolina, of course, a person with direct knowledge said that that Michigan may very well have reached out to a team or teams that could help derail possible teams that could get in the way of Michigan. And of course, we know Beamer was fined $25,000 for this in 2016, a very similar issue. We know that South Carolina scored 16 points total prior against Missouri and Florida, an average of 8 points, then suddenly scored 9 straight touchdowns against us. Did they have our defensive signals? South Carolina then beat another team that was in the way of Michigan had they lost to Ohio State. That was Clemson, who had 1 loss. And South Carolina does not beat Clemson at Clemson. So they beat 2 top 10 teams. Then they started out this year. You'd think a team that won 2 top 10 games would have no problem, get off to a good start with the same quarterback, same coach. They started out 2-6. They ended up 5-7. They had 1 quality win, which was Kentucky by 3 at home. They scored 17 points. So for some reason, that offensive juggernaut just stopped. It stopped. It didn't follow into the next year. It just ended, and it wasn't there before. And of course, we know that South Carolina had the wristbands that they used for the Tennessee game, and an ESPN reporter made a big deal out of it. That had been the first time they'd ever done that. And then they didn't do it the next year against us. at Neyland Stadium, which that's the place you'd want to use it because it's so loud, but they didn't need them this year.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
Of course, they lost, which is what you'd expect. But anyway, I guess they didn't need the wristbands for some reason. Odd. So I told you folks I was going to keep up with this. And the fact that Sankey dropped that bomb like that, I mean, he just ripped Michigan to shreds. I mean, imagine saying we don't send the signs to other teams at their events. I mean, that's vicious. And of course, the ESPN guys laughed because it's funny. And things that ring true sometimes can be very funny. Now, I can't prove this. This is all alleged. But you know what? That Vol Twitter guy that came out and said that he had the friend that had been asked to scout the Vanderbilt game for Michigan and Connor Stallions, everybody thought he was a nut too. How'd that turn out? And this was reported by Zach Reagan of A to Z Sports. He talked about a message board where Arnie Palmy Alert, I couldn't remember the guy's name. I had to look it up. Arnie Palmy Alert says, no clue if related, but I posted on here a couple of months ago about a mutual friend of mine that was working for Michigan, going to other schools, games, stealing signs. They'd pay his flight, lodging, food, and seats right behind the team's bench for him to get video, notes, etc. Michigan is pulling out all the stops, it seems. Can check my history to confirm if you want. Guy had tickets to our game at Vandy as they'd already paid for his stuff, thinking they'd see us in the playoffs before we lost to South Carolina. And then he said, one of my little brother's friends is a scout for them. They paid for him to travel to the UT Vandy game, had planned it before the loss, obviously, to try to steal our signs. He's from Nashville originally, so he just went anyway, even after our loss since it was Thanksgiving. Says he and the others are not allowed to talk to Harbaugh directly about it. So, yeah, back then, when that came out, oh, well, that's just nonsense. Michigan wouldn't do that. That's ridiculous. That's just somebody on a message board on Twitter, whatever. You know, can't pay any attention to that. He was dead on. Couldn't have been more dead on that one, according to all the reports. According to all the reports that have been all over the place. So I find that pretty interesting. So it's reached all levels. The fact that Sankey brought that up, was that a direct smack towards Michigan? Of course. Was it a direct smack against another team? Possibly. You never know. And who was the team that would have been able to help Michigan the most? South Carolina, playing both Tennessee and Clemson. And by the way, I was viciously attacked by a Carolina YouTuber that goes by the name of Carolina Jackpot. He came over the top ring. I mean, it was brutal and vicious.
Ladies and gentlemen, get your cameras ready.
Okay, it wasn't really that bad.
No, not really. I can't back that up.
He wasn't near as vicious as I'm letting on. But anyway, he disagreed slightly. Now, on the other hand, he said it is a possibility. You know, he's not totally ruling it out. He just thinks, you know, it probably didn't happen. You know, we're going to find out eventually. NCAA is going to get to the bottom of all this, and they'll figure out because, look, if there's any communication whatsoever between an analyst at Michigan or an assistant coach and South Carolina analyst, assistant coach, email, anything like that, they're going to find it. You know, they've got the FBI up there. They've got NCAA up there.
I wasn't going to give you the third degree, but now you're going to get it, and don't you try and stop me, Andy.
They got plenty to find out. And you know how hard it is to get rid of anything electronic, and that's how everybody communicates these days. So if there's an email, text, anything like that, especially on a company device, which could very well be, they're going to find it. They're going to find out about it.
Are you sure?
This is going to be pretty interesting. This has been reported a lot. I'm not the only person by any stretch, and I've shown you many, many YouTubers and many journalists that have been on this story, and people are just waiting for more information. But I caught that Greg Sankey comment, and I thought, aha, could be a direct comment, and I will stay on top of this thing. I'm not done with you, Michigan, and I'm not done with you, South Carolina, and Mr. Shane Beamer. I can't prove it yet. It's alleged, but if it does come out, don't you worry, I'll bring it to you. And if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. That's been able to continue to cover my Vols and, of course, the NCAA, and I'm staying on top of this Michigan sign stealing thing. They're going to have to vacate if they win the national championship. You want to talk about some drama. They win this thing after all this? Oh, man, what a mess. And you've already got Florida State that got creaked after 13-0. That's why you don't have a 4-team playoff. I've said that for years. It's ridiculous. Have like 16, 12, 8, at least have enough to where you don't have an undefeated team not get in. It's ridiculous. And if you've not subscribed, it's on your right, my left. Just hit that little button right there to help you get my videos. And right over here is a video YouTube thinks you'll like based on your recent viewing history. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.